My compositions are eclectic by nature, but they speak with my voice, which is a multidimensional voice. I'm influenced by many things, from Renaissance music to Charles Ives to John Coltrane, Indian music, of course, in a big way, to Bartok, you name it. I'm really a modal thinker. I think in terms of modes, I think in terms of modal color, whether modes are scales, harmonic entities, or scales of potentiality that one can use, and the dimensionality that modes give is what inform my composition. Any piece has to work. It's got to tell a story, and it's got to go from one end to the other and make sense. Each section has to sound good by itself, especially if there's variables for improvisation. It still doesn't mean that the piece itself, whether it's the A section, B section, coda, conclusion, whatever, doesn't have to work intact as a composition. I'm a melodist by nature. Maybe it's my Italian roots, but also because I'm so into Indian music, which is really so completely melodic and linear. I love the interaction of melody and rhythm, and then harmony is this third dimension that you add that kind of ties it together. And then all these can even transcend their own boundaries, which is one of the beautiful things about modern composition, is that you can go beyond the limits of whatever idiom is imposed and let it sort of take on its own life. I use some different flavors, modal flavors in my piece. For example, in Hidden Mandala, it sounds like E Aeolian scale, but I'm thinking really of C Lydian. Kind of based loosely on the Hindustani rag Yemen, which is a Lydian scale. Changing the tonic, moving it around, typical modal compositional style. And this opens up the possibilities, and that's thinking as a composer using modal potentialities the way I like to compose. And I certainly didn't invent that technique, but anyone who does it has to do it their own way and find their way of using it. It's a very open, infinite thing. Then I use another Indian mode in this piece. Based loosely on a raga called Chairokeshi, but I do that in a different key area. And in a traditional Indian piece, of course, no one would transpose keys like that. And so each flavor takes on a modal flavor which intersects with jazz, but has a distinct Indian leaning. You know, in that sense, too, that someone once made the comment about Mahavishnu, that, well, gee, it sounds like Indian music, but it's not Indian music, it's jazz. And so as a composer, I find my own way of putting this together, you know, makes it interesting. Then I use another piece where again based loosely on the North Indian Raga Bhairavi, or the Southerners would call it Sindhu Bhairavi, and I take that beautiful scale and use a traditional composition. But I put some harmony to it. And then it takes on a whole new shape when you harmonize it. And you can still work within the traditional melodic framework, but then move it around, and it pushes you and pulls you in different directions. That's what jazz and contemporary Western music do. Indian music gets very deeply into a single focal point. So for me, the music is an intersection of these two things, still in the Western camp, but with these influences. If this is Western music, jazz, this is Indian music, I'm certainly close to the border, but I'm still for sure on the Western side. And then, of course, when I add synths, it adds that other dimension to it. But every basic composer kind of finds their own voice. And I think of something I read once from the great French writer Camus. Albert Camus said that basically he was talking about talented people who he referred to in this context as geniuses. He said every talented person will draw a circle around what's in their world, and they will master those dimensions, but it's putting that together, that unique thing, that kind of makes it interesting. But then they have to master everything in that dimension, and that's what makes it tough. Just an interesting thought. So I'm always thinking of what circle am I drawing, getting back to the mandala kind of theme, how the cyclicism connects. So, whew.